Well, good morning, everybody. Well, actually, I think it's almost afternoon, but welcome back to Adult Child of Dysfunction. Today we have with us Wendy Correa. She is an author. She actually just wrote a book, My Pretty Baby, which we're going to talk about later. She is also a yogi, a hiker, as well as a licensed marriage therapist. She has worked in the film, television, multimedia, and music industries in Los Angeles and as a radio DJ in Aspen, Colorado. Wendy holds bachelor's degrees in psychology and theater arts and has contributed articles to Mothering Magazine. She's a wife, a mother, and she resides in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you, Tammy. It's great to be here.
I feel like that did not touch your background.
Well, a bit.
There's a little bit, but I feel like there's so much more to talk about. And just before we got on, Wendy and I were talking about the ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, and we probably have a lot of common there. So I'm going to let you just take it away and talk about you do a lot of work with the ACEs and talk about your experience as far as what was your number the first time you ran the scale?
Well, my number is 7. So I, when I was writing the book, I was also reading all of the research from Gabor Mate, The Myth of Normal, Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's What Happened to You, The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke Harris, and of course, Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps Score. And when I took the quiz and I was reading about adverse childhood experiences, my head exploded because I realized this is real. This is nothing that I'm making up. This is real. There is all this research behind it. And it made me feel, I mean, not that I'm happy to know I have a score of 7 out of 10, but that I'm not alone, that there are millions of us who have a high ACE score, and that there is evidence to support that of what we can also do to heal.
Yes. I was going to say, most importantly, that there is, nothing drives me more crazy than when they say, okay, so people, if you had 4 to 6 ACEs, you're 40 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder. And if you had 7 to 10, you're 62% more likely to attempt suicide or and I'm just like, stop.
Right.
That's if you literally never do anything about it. That's if you never
Exactly.
become aware and you never go and seek help or do what you have to do to rewire some of that
Our
negative stuff,
brains.
right?
Yes.
Rewire. So,
Yes.
um, yeah, so 7 out of 10. I think we were talking before this, and I was saying, yeah, I had 9 out of 10, but that's only because I didn't have the incarceration part because they didn't know what was going on. So, had they known, then I would have been 10 out of 10. But I'm standing here today and I don't want to say completely healed and at the stop sign of bliss because it's a journey,
Yes.
but there's so much out there now that for people. So if you read those statistics, I just say poo poo on them. Like your future and what you do with this information now going forward is completely and totally up to you, not
Yes.
written in a book.
Exactly. Well, I
So
think it's very important to have the statistics and to look at the statistics and to know that this is um, real, and that
oh, yeah.
what I like to say is that when people ask me why I wrote My Pretty Baby, for instance, I always say I realized that my family's dysfunction and secrets had written my biography and therefore my biology. And I wanted to rewrite my story and choose my own happy ending. But as I was writing it, I realized it was a call to action because it's not just my story. It's about how millions of us carry wounds that science now proves actually does rewire our biology and impacts our health and our relationships for life.
Absolutely. And just, I work with a lot of people and mostly primarily adult children of alcoholics. And now they've changed that term kind of to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families because they've realized that trauma, it doesn't matter if alcohol is involved or drugs are involved. It's any type of major dysfunction. And w- I love that you mentioned the body connection because not one of my clients or people that I've worked with ever has been completely devoid of either inflammation, gut issues, anxiety, weight, all of the chronic, the just the inflammation in general. And it's so that The Body Keeps Score is one of the most instrumental books, I think, to get people to really read it and go, oh, wow, I get it.
Right,
Because,
exactly.
I mean, it did,
Yes.
when I read it, I was like, oh my God, like this makes so much sense.
Yes. I mean, I was so happy while I was writing the book to have all of the scientific evidence to support what I was writing about. And when people ask me what My Pretty Baby is about, I always say that it's an autopsy of my family. I peeled apart the layers of intergenerational and childhood trauma, family dysfunction, family secrets, addiction, and I found healing over the last 45 years through Buddhism, meditation, yoga, sobriety, music, psychotherapy, and Native American spirituality. And in my book, I weave through all of the extraordinary experiences that I had along the way and the incredible encounters I had with the likes of Ringo Starr and Joni Mitchell and Hunter S. Thompson. And it really is about resilience and recovery and creating your own chosen family when the one you had is broken. And going back to the ACE study, I was reading these books by Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and realizing that trauma isn't just an external event. It is what happens inside of us, as Dr. Gabor Mate says, and the stress literally changes the brain and the body, especially the central nervous system and the immune system. And that trauma does not disappear, it hides in our bodies. And so as you said, anxiety, addiction, rage, chronic illnesses like irritable bowel and heart disease is often the body keeping score, as Bessel van der Kolk puts it.
Oh, yeah.
And in reading about this and realizing I was not alone, um, when I found the adverse childhood experiences and took the quiz and realized that about two-thirds of adults have at least one of the 10 ACEs, and one in six has four or more. And when I read The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, she did say if a child has six or more, their life expectancy can decrease by 20 years. So that was a wake-up call. And while that is a scary statistic, I think it's important to know that while trauma is universal, so is healing.
Hmm.
And what I learned, and I was so grateful to learn, is that all those modalities that I sought out to heal myself intuitively are the very same things that all these researchers say we can do to heal. So it is not a life sentence.
No.
But it's important to have that information to know how to take care of yourself, how to heal, how to take care of your central nervous system. And that I find information is powerful.
Oh, yeah. And that's what kind of got me on my journey. I mean, I was in my own journey of figuring this all out. And then when I started coaching and really working with people, it's you don't want it to be a life sentence. Like you said, it is very powerful. And actually, it was kind of like you said, you were almost relieved. I felt like when you said that, it was like you almost like you were relieved, like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. It's not my
Yes.
fault.
It's not
So,
my fault, and I'm
mm,
not making it up. And all of the anxiety that I have, there's a reason that I have
mm,
anxiety. And yeah, it helped me to understand myself and to have compassion for myself and what I had gone through.
Absolutely. Now, for people that have not, and I have done a couple other episodes on the ACEs in general, so we've listed them out 1 through 10 kind of thing. But just to give you an idea, there's things that you don't even think about. Um, like it doesn't have to be sexual abuse, but it could be watching your parents doing something inappropriate. So it could be, I mean, there's things that it doesn't always have to be like, oh my gosh, that was so horrific and that happened to me. It can be things that you just experienced. It could be, living in poverty. It could be somebody in your house having a substance use disorder. It could be um, a divorce. It could, there's so many different things. So you made a very good point when before we got on here to point out to the listeners that just because you did not have this one grandiose, huge, big T trauma does not mean you didn't experience any of the adverse childhood experiences because
Absolutely. Hmm.
they happen. I mean, perfect example is, children that might have grown up in this completely lovely, beautiful household, but they might have witnessed a school shooting.
Right.
That, I mean, things happen that literally, and I always like to say, just because it was trauma or just because it was a traumatic event does not mean it's going to become trauma in your body if it can be properly processed and dealt with and released. But unfortunately, as children, especially children that grew up in a household probably like you and I, there wasn't that release. There wasn't that validation back then. So it does get stored.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, when my father died when I was 7 years old, people didn't have the information that they have today. They didn't know that it was very important to talk to me about death. It would have been very healing and important if they had said, even murmur things like, you can always talk to your daddy and we can talk to him in the stars, and he's so sad he's never going to see you grow up, and you needn't worry, your mom is healthy and she's not going to die like your dad did, and it's very sad but he was very sick and there was nothing they could do. They said none of these things. So
That's what I was gonna.
I was
That's what,
left in the mystery of what is death and what is happening, and with no one talking to me. And so, for me at the time that my father died, JFK had just been assassinated. And so I watched Caroline Kennedy and the national news because the whole United States, the whole world was grieving. And that's how I learned about grieving. But also a few years later, when my mom became involved with who would become my stepdad, who was an alcoholic, and I would say it had mental illness and rageaholic and violent tempers. We also didn't have the information that we are really now starting to delve into about mental health issues. And, my mom, bless her heart, used to say to me, Wendy, when I was coming up, we didn't have Oprah. We didn't talk about these things. And it's true in African American families or immigrant families where there was tremendous hardship and there was intergenerational trauma, but we wouldn't talk about it because they were just trying to survive. They would put on a happy face and they wouldn't want to burden their children with it. But that, as we know, as Bessel van der Kolk says, it comes out. It's going to come
yeah.
out. And a lot of people try to shove that trauma down through, silence or through addictions or shopping or gambling or having affairs or all the myriad of things that people do to not have to look at themselves, to not have to sit with the pain, that you actually need to sit with the pain and move through it in order to heal it. And so that's sort of what I hope My Pretty Baby is also a guidebook for people to sort of see the steps that I took and how I came to the understanding that as I got sober, for instance, oh, all of this pain that is bubbling up. I mean, when I quit smoking, I cried every day for 3 months. And I realized that nicotine and smoking was pushing down that pain, and that by then I had really immersed myself in Buddhist studies and meditation, that, the beloved Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, the art of happiness is also the art of suffering well,
Mm,
meaning we have to sit with the pain, we have to embrace it, and we have to feel it in order to move through it. And even Robert Frost said, the only way out is through. So
right.
we have a lot of wisdom and guidance out there that understands that we have to feel these feelings in order to heal them.
Yep. I know there's so many of those, like you have to feel to heal and you have to, and it's true. And I always talk about the invisible backpack that we have as kids, especially when we grew up in those dysfunctional homes, and everything that happens, you throw it in this backpack that you just can't, you're either told not important, don't deal with it now, we'll deal with it later, or it's, just whatever it is, just put it back there. And I always kind of just, that's my visual for people. And then all of a sudden you're 25 and you have 1,000 things in this backpack, and now you're wondering why you have bleeding ulcers and you're because yeah, you didn't see it, but you sure feel it. And that's like the
Yes,
quickest layman's terms to put that in. But the good thing is you can unpack one of those things at a time. And there's also so many different modalities. Yes, you have to acknowledge and you have to know and you have to, come to not come to terms or come to peace, but you don't have to relive. You do not have to relive something to actually release it and let it go, but you do have to acknowledge that it happened. You have to give it a name.
yes.
So,
Well, one of the modalities that helped me tremendously, besides all of the other things, when I was in therapy, my therapist used EMDR. So that modality helps you to process those memories. They're still there, of course, the experiences are still there, but it helps your brain to process it so that it doesn't trigger you emotionally and doesn't trigger your central nervous system. Anytime something um, that otherwise might trigger you, if somebody speaks harshly to you, you might be reliving a time in your childhood home. So EMDR helps you to process those traumatic events calmly and peacefully. And another modality that she used is called IMTT, or image transformation therapy, which again is sort of a guided imagery to help you to sort of just to process those. Now, in the thick of it, when I was going through some very intense times, I was also meditating, but there was even times where I couldn't sit for more than 30 seconds. My central nervous system was so um, in alarm or fight or flight state. So that's when more somatic modalities such as yoga or walking or hiking or dancing, any kind of movement can be really helpful when you are right at the height of trying to process traumatic experiences.
absolutely. And sometimes, for people that are sitting here going, oh my gosh, everybody tells me to meditate. It doesn't have to be sitting down with your hands crossed and ooh, although
Exactly.
that vagus nerve stimulation is very good to do the part, but it can be, I have a one girl that I work with that has ADHD, so she can't sit still. There's no such thing. So I said,
Right.
well, just when you're folding your laundry, just get into a routine, fold two, three, four, count, like just focus on your laundry, focus on it. It's just anything to just kind of bring you to the present, because people that are suffering from anxiety, it's like so much of it is because of subconscious memories of what happened in the past. And then so much of it is anticipation of what could possibly potentially happen because of the subconscious memories of what happened in the past. So it's like
Exactly.
you're either in the past or you're in the future. And 99.99% that stuff is not going to happen in the future, but it's still running through your mind and playing that stress loop. So just getting to the present any way you can, like the here and now.
Absolutely.
I am safe. I'm
Yes.
okay. Just. But you talked about one of your things, and I don't know, you talked about generational trauma, and you also talked about family secrets. Was there one big one, or was it just a conglomerate of the addiction and the whatever?
No, there's one big one. I hate to spoil it
Oh,
because I
okay. Don't
want
then.
people to read My
Don't.
Pretty Baby, but in my years of trying to sort out what happened to my family, it was mostly, you know, the the most obvious, of course, was my father died. I had this alcoholic stepfather, but I also had very distant older siblings who um, they didn't dote on me like an older sibling typically would, and I I always
Don't ruin it.
had no, I always had nagging feelings that there's something more here. There's something more going on in my family, and I did start to unveil some of the secrets. Like when my mother was in her 70s, she finally told me that she had been sexually assaulted numerous times by a neighbor when she was a little girl. That, of course, affected her and her choices in men and her parenting and so on. And there were other things like my father who had died. I always thought that he had served in World War II in Germany. And my mother let me just believe that. But long after she was gone, I got his army records, and he actually had a heart condition, and he only was in Oakland, California for 9 months. And so there were smaller like
Hmm.
secrets. And it wasn't until I was already writing my book that the big one I
Don't say.
unveiled, and I had a, well, that makes a lot of sense
Hmm.
moment. And that was the one that really brought together all of the secrets. But also my stepdad had his own intergenerational trauma and a secret. His family were immigrants from Switzerland, and they had left a child behind in Switzerland that was um, a horrific thing for a family. I can imagine they left a child behind, and so there was so much trauma that was never talked about, that was never shared, and it oozes out into
Hmm.
your relationships when you are trying to keep those secrets.
Well, it oozes out into everything, absolutely, because you're just you're in fight or flight your entire life, literally, when you're holding something like that in. And it's like if you can't let it go, if you can't release it, if you can't talk about it, you can't share it, you're just constantly, you go through your whole life on the defense
Right.
and you just act so differently. So, what would you say, just because of how you grew up now, before you started kind of into your healing journey, what were some of the things that followed you into adulthood, like some of the patterns?
Well, so going back to my stepdad, I mean, I grew up in a very unsafe home. He was an alcoholic, and he was violent and triggered, just by small things. And I didn't even find out until he had died, this his family secret, and understood that his father was also violent. And because I wanted to understand what happened to him. So, of course, in my pain of being rejected by my stepfather, the violence in the home, being rejected by my siblings, when I left home at 17 is when my real journey started. And I left Illinois and I moved to California, and I immediately found nature and hiking and a deep peace. And then I found Zen Buddhism. And I continued that when I moved to Los Angeles. I spent many years studying Native American spirituality with Native people. And I had gone to acting school in San Francisco where I learned yoga. And then I was in the music industry, and all of those things really helped me. Um, s- so um, I think that, I just knew that I had to survive. I had a very strong survival instinct, and I knew that I had to do what I had to do to survive, basically.
Yeah. But and then what was the point at which you were like, okay, I'm going to stop surviving and I'm actually going to thrive? Like when was that?
Okay, well, I would say that healing is not linear. So you could take two steps forward and one step back. And it was the proverbial peeling the emotional onion layers. And, I got in what I was working on a master's degree in psychology at Antioch University in Los Angeles. And part of the program to become a therapist, you had to go through therapy. And so that therapist helped me to start looking at my inner child. And at the same time, before that, I had been studying acting, and we did this extraordinary, it was a Stanislavski method acting class. And we did this incredible sense memory class where we had to describe a memory. And I was describing one about my father who had died, being in the garden and him picking this beautiful ripe strawberry and popping it into my mouth, and the honeysuckle on the braided archway. And I was describing all of these senses. And I was thinking, this is just a beautiful, loving memory that I have of my father. As I'm going through the exercise in front of my class and my teacher said, speak to him, Wendy, speak to him. And I had no idea how to speak to my dead father. And I had these feelings that were coming up, that were bubbling up inside of me, and he kept prodding me, speak to him, speak to him. And I blurted out, I'm angry at you. And I was
Mm,
25. So it was 19 years after he had died. And I had no idea that I was angry at him for dying. And it was the first time that I realized I had all this unprocessed grief and trauma. And at the same time, I'm working with a therapist, and that was the beginning of the work of my inner child, of feeling abandoned by my father dying, of feeling abandoned by my mother because she was with an alcoholic man, and feeling abandoned by my siblings who were very emotionally distant. So you know, it was like slowly peeling the onion apart and understanding that the years of this trauma, I needed to process it. And it was those little steps that made me realize. And then I, I would really want to quit doing substances. I was drinking and smoking pot. And of course, in Los Angeles, I was in the music industry for years. I was snorting cocaine. And I always knew I needed to stop it, but those substances were helping me to not feel that pain that I
mhm.
so really needed to feel. And it wasn't until I actually got arrested for a DUI and thrown in jail and had court ordered AA meetings that I now call a miracle that I was arrested and thrown in jail, because that was the beginning of finding sobriety. And that was really when I really realized, okay, this is highly detrimental, and it's time that I really focus on healing.
I mean, it's a blessing in disguise, is what it was. And that's,
Yes,
when two people are going through the healing process, and I tell them, every opportunity, look at life as happening for you, not to you. So that would be one of those examples. Like instead of being pissed off about that, like being like, oh, I can't
exactly.
believe I did this. What am I stupid? Blah, blah, blah. Be like, okay, this is clearly a wake up call. And it's going to teach me something, and it's going to propel me in the right direction. So, yeah, no, a lot of people I think have those. A lot of times it has to do with children. When all of a sudden they have a child that they have to care for, and they're like, "Whoa, things have to change, or else it's
Mhm.
going to be bad." Because, like you said, you always kind of had, it seems like, that intuition of it's deeper than just my stepdad. It goes deeper. So like it's like you knew that there was this generational thing going on where, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't talk about generational trauma.
Right.
I mean, my mother was a child psychiatrist. She was a doctor. Like, so, I mean, all I took from that as a child was, wow, I'm being manipulated by the best.
Uh-huh.
You
Yes. Right.
know, I was like, wow, I was like, I learned from the best, but I learned a lot of coping skills that did not serve me well as adult at all. That's that's why when I asked the patterns, I was like, did you fall into those traditional like people pleasing and no boundaries and like did you fall into all those patterns?
Myself, yes, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, and and reliving the same sort of pattern. I had relationships with men that, oh, I can save them or I can fix them.
Mm,
I desperately wanted to fix my family. I wanted us to have a loving family. And so of course I tried to work that out in relationships with people that were, either using substances or um they, you know, had problems with intimacy and so forth. And so there were a number of relationships where I was sort of, wait a minute, what am I doing with, an alcoholic here? I'm not going to fix him, and this is not my job. But certainly we do repeat, what feels comfortable, even if it's not good for us. It's what we know, it's what we've been how we were raised, and it feels comfortable in some regards. And that's why we have to finally feel the feelings and know when to get out and
mhm.
and to only um, to have people around us who love us, who hold us up, who bring out the best in us. And that sometimes takes a while to understand and to create.
And yeah, it's very hard because, like you said, your brain likes familiarity. It likes what
Mhm.
it knows versus being it. It could see. I remember when the first couple times it was like pure joy. It felt very uncomfortable. It felt, I was like, oh, I'm not used to this. I'm not, when people started like with the first person that actually treated me very nicely, I
Mhm.
didn't. It didn't feel right at all.
Exactly. The good boys were like,
Mhm.
no, or they're not exciting enough, or
Mhm.
yeah, or it doesn't feel comfortable. Exactly. It took a number of kissing frogs before I actually found my husband, who I've been now married to for 30 years.
Oh, so you found your prince
I did. I
among all
did.
those toads.
Exactly. I did, but it did take quite a while.
Is the picture on the book you?
That is me. That
Okay.
is absolutely me. I
For the
must
people
have
that are
been
just listening, you have to get the book. I mean, it's called My Pretty Baby,
baby.
My Pretty Baby, and it is a picture of her on the cover, and she's absolutely adorable. But I have a very similar picture of me that I actually that looks very much like that with the cute little dress and everything that I used to use when they used to tell me when I first started my inner child work to put it, to put it on the mirror. And did you go through that stage where they helped you do that, or?
Well, actually, yes, but I didn't have this picture until about in the last decade, because through the miracle of social media, I found an old neighbor from that time who sent me the picture.
Oh,
And
wow.
I didn't have a lot of pictures of myself until I went to school. So when she sent me this picture, at first I was like, wait, she's wrong. That can't be me. That isn't me, is it? And the more that I looked at it, I realized it was me. But I had done inner child work decades ago, actually, with Louise Hay.
Hmm.
Remember Louise Hay? I was in a woman's group in Los Angeles that did that practice. And that's when I started to do the inner child work. But also, I was able to forgive my stepdad and to see him as a wounded child through that work. But even more recently, I've continued to do inner child work. And
Well,
I
it's
know,
some.
I know
Oh,
that
sorry.
I'm going to be doing this work for the rest of my life. I mean, it's not just a one and done. It is a daily practice. And, in any kind of a practice, whether it's yoga or meditation or, exercising, um, it's a daily practice.
And it's a muscle. You have to strengthen that muscle to think differently, to react differently. I know sometimes I've caught myself, doing, I did like 6 years solid of the inner child work, but I caught myself and I'll snap at somebody or something and I'll literally say to myself, okay, that was the 5-year-old you.
Right?
Like,
Yes.
like stop it. Um, yeah, and I catch myself doing that, but I know when I did the inner child work, I remember the first time they told me to put that picture on the mirror and to talk to her and to tell her you loved her. I remember hating that little girl. I
Mm.
hated that little girl in the picture. I don't know if you ever experienced that.
Well, we did it in the mirror when I was doing the Louise Hay work. We would look in the mirror at ourselves. And I write about this in my book because at first, when I would look in the mirror and say, I love you just the way you are, I burst out laughing because it felt
Hmm.
so uncomfortable. And it wasn't, and then I would try a different way to phrase it. And my real wounding was that I didn't feel lovable in my family. So when I looked in the mirror and said to myself, you are lovable, I broke down and burst out crying. And that was the real healing, to tell myself that I was lovable and I deserved to have love in my family.
It was, yeah, because we went and I did it just a little bit different. And for the people listening, you can still grab Louise Hay's stuff because she's amazing and so many tips and tricks and all of anything you listen to, anything you read from her is absolutely wonderful. But I remember doing that where they had me put the picture on the mirror and I just did not like I don't even know what I just almost disgust. And it was weeks I went through this, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna push through this no matter what because they told me it eventually it will change. And I remember the day that all of a sudden it flipped and I was like, wow, she was so vulnerable.
Hmm.
And then the
Yes.
process started, but it was weeks. So if you out there and you're doing inner child work, and especially if you're not working with a coach or a therapist and you've just grabbed like inner child workbook
Yes.
um, online, keep going. That's my best advice because there's so many opportunities where, like you said, you'll laugh and then you'll be like, this is stupid,
Hmm.
but keep going because the process works. You just have to work the process. It's kind of like a 12-step.
Absolutely. Yes. And um, healing, as I said, it isn't a straight line and it's a full-time job, it's your life. And I continue to do yoga and hiking and meditation and my Buddhist studies and, you know, but something might set off my fight, flight, fear, anxiety cycle. Something might still trigger it. And so I know that I have to really take good care of myself and to have quiet. I listen to a lot of classical music. I surround myself with really good people and only people that bring out the best in me. And, I know that my central nervous system needs to go to yoga and it needs to go for walks and all of those things. It's really getting to know yourself and to get to know your little inner child, your little, pretty baby. And sometimes I visualize just like pulling her up into my lap and giving her a hug because she went through a lot. And now I can have so much compassion and grace for her
Right.
that I hope when people read my book that it feels like a guidebook to them. And one of the reasons that I wrote it is so I tell my story so that I hope that others feel less alone in theirs.
Yep, absolutely. Because there's so many millions of people walking around on the planet right now that went through some pretty horrific things that have never even tried to process it. And again, it's like you said, I didn't feel worthy or I didn't feel lovable by my family. And that is literally the underlying belief of not being good enough, smart enough, funny enough, just not being enough or not being lovable. that fuels every every step in your life until you can actually change that. I remember
Yes.
people, that's what made me realize I had to fix something because I was getting ready to have a kid and I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what unconditional love feels like. And I'm like, the closest I've experienced would have been my grandmother, who I feel like love would have loved me unconditionally, but I never told her anything that was happening. So I didn't even feel like she really even knew me.
Hmm.
So that's what like kind of prompted me like, oh crap, I got some learning to do.
And I used to teach prenatal yoga years ago. I was a doula for birth and a childbirth educator and taught prenatal yoga. And I would say to my students, it was a very intimate group. And a lot of times I would say to them, now that you're pregnant, this is a really great time to go to therapy. This is a really great time to look at, the good, the bad, and the ugly of how you were raised, how you were parented, and what you might like to do differently. And I also want my readers to know that trauma may be universal, but so is healing. And
Right.
that telling the truth about what happened isn't about blame or retribution, it's about breaking cycles and healing. And I always say, especially if you have children, I believe one of the greatest gifts that you can give your children is to be the cycle breaker yourself, because healing isn't just possible, it's contagious in the best sense of the word.
Absolutely. Very well said. I mean, it is true. And for the parents out there that are going, oh my gosh, I was a terrible mom. I was a terrible this. I was a terrible that. Don't beat yourself up. I mean, yes, way back when was the best time to start healing, but the next best time is right now.
Right?
So just start moving forward because they will see that. It doesn't matter how old your children are, they will see you going through those changes and they will grow with you and they will heal with you because, like you said, it's stuck in your body. So, like I tell my kids, my DNA, their DNA is different
Mhm.
than it would be been just because of what I went through. And that's science. You can't change that. But you can, they're going to have to rewire some of those things and learn from watching me. And unfortunately, sometimes it's watching my mistakes, but you can't beat yourself up about that because that doesn't get you anywhere.
Right. I mean, the intention, if you have a good intention, there's no expiration date, for healing and for um, wanting to make amends or, wanting to heal the past or to talk about, even just to discuss and talk about intergenerational trauma and how to be a cycle breaker. There's no expiration date. And when you start to have children, yes, it's a great time to heal. But if you missed that window, then, when your kids are having kids, then maybe that's a great time for you to do the healing. But um, there's always time to do that healing. And I encourage everyone just to take those baby steps. Sometimes it might feel very uncomfortable to have conversations about family, but like I said, it's not about blame or retribution. And if you can hold, you know, your family with compassion and grace. Even if you are estranged from them or you've had to set very clear boundaries with them, there's a saying, I can forgive them. That doesn't mean I want to have lunch with them, but I can
Right.
forgive them. But then again, I also say in my book, I mean, I've been able to forgive my family, but I do recognize that there are some things that are unforgivable. And I would never tell someone, that they have to forgive. That is no longer true. You do not have to forgive. If you're not able to forgive, then that is for every individual person to forgive or not forgive on their own time and in their own way. Forgiveness is not for the person you're forgiving. Forgiveness
Absolutely.
is for you to lay down that resentment or that anger that we carry in our bodies, sometimes we're waiting for someone to apologize and that apology will never come. So, if you have to set boundaries, if you have to be estranged from a person as such as I am, then that's what you need to do to protect yourself and to heal. But if you can, from a distance, you know, put down that anger, it's for you. So
Absolutely.
forgiveness is for the forgiver. And in Buddhist psychology, Jack Kornfield talks a lot about this, and that's what really helped me to come to a place of forgiveness. And so that is for you to heal, but that doesn't mean that you um, condone what they did or
Condone
that
or
you,
forget
or
or any of that.
forget or any of that. And as I said, there are some things that may be unforgivable, but if you can heal, it does give you a lot of freedom and grace.
And I 100% agree because I've said that. I know the Hawaiian or the Japanese and Hawaiian hono, ono, pono, whatever that's called, and they're like, oh no, you have to. You can't move on until you forgive. Well, then maybe we just need to rewrite what forgiveness means to us because I'm
Exactly.
the same way. There are some acts, some specific acts that I will never forgive that specific thing, but it doesn't have that emotional charge on me like it used to. I've let go of all the anger, all the animosity. You know, I've rewritten all that story in my mind. So to me, that I'm good. I'm absolved of that. I don't have to stress about that or feel guilt because so many people what is it? The fourth step in a 12-step program is forgiveness and
Mhm.
some people quit. So many people quit going through a 12-step program because they're like I will never forgive.
Right,
Then maybe we just need to find a way to rewrite that word, what it means to you,
right,
because or else you'll never move. You have to let go of the anger. And that to me, I'm
right,
like, okay, I'm good. Like, I can say those stories now, even the ones that the acts are not forgivable. I can tell that story and it doesn't have an emotional charge. It doesn't get me all in a frenzy and, ball up my stomach anymore. So,
right. Yes, and in her book, Drama Free, Nedra Tawwab says that sometimes healing means stronger boundaries or even estrangement. And there's a new book out by Eamon Dolan who writes in The Power of Parting that we should hold family members to the same standards as friends, and that walking away can be a form of survival. So if a friend is abusive to us, we can end that friendship. But when it comes to a family member, we call it estrangement. And he's saying, no, we need to hold these people to the same standards as a friend. Maybe a friendship just no longer serves us. It's just not a good friendship for us. And the same should be said about um, family members. And, um, I think that Dr. Dan Siegel also says in his book, Healing Trauma, that the roots of resilience are in being understood. When someone truly sees us and accepts us, our brain rewires. Safe connection is medicine. So we need to be surrounded by people that we feel safe with. And and I wanted to say the Buddha said, having anger is like picking up a hot coal
mhm,
and thinking you're going to throw it at someone else. You're the one that gets burned.
you get
So
burned. Yep.
that's why forgiveness is good for you. Not to condone, not to forget, and not necessarily to reconcile,
No,
but
not
for your
absolutely.
own peace.
Absolutely. I remember saying to a client a couple years ago, I remember it was kind of that, do I walk away? What do I do? This is my family. And all her life she had heard, you can't be angry. He's your brother. He's your brother. He's your brother. You can't be mad. You have to forgive him, all this stuff. And I said, if he wasn't your brother, would he be in your life? And she said, absolutely not.
Then there
Then
you
that's
go.
okay. because
Right.
blood is not thicker than water. Like that is not, that's one of those cliche sayings that really holds no ground. If they do not serve being in your life, they should not be in your life. I mean,
Absolutely.
and it was funny when I finally said that, she was like, "Wow, that was that simple." I'm like, "It is that simple." It just because they're your family. I mean, I heard that my whole life. You can't hate her. You can't do this. You can't do that. She's your mother. She's crazy and she's mean and she's ugly. Like
Exactly.
I don't need that. So,
Yes,
but
that has been drummed into us, oh, but they're your family and blood is thicker than water. And um, yeah, those
if
are
that
old, outdated terms, and
yes,
we
and if
need
that
to
was
take
true,
that
then they
in.
And if that was true, then they wouldn't be doing those things to you because I have people that treat me much nicer that are not blood relatives to me that I consider my family. So,
Exactly. Chosen family and
hmm
surrounding people with who love you, that bring out the best in you and only want the best for you. That's who we need to surround ourselves with.
absolutely. Well, Wendy, this has been super fun, but how do you work with people? Do you work with people? I mean, I know you have your book. Talk about that. If people want to work with you or want to reach out to you, what's the best place for them to reach you?
Well, they can reach me at www.wendy, B as in boy, Correa, Correa. I'm on Instagram at Wendy B. Correa. I'm on Facebook at Wendy Correa. And uh, so when you say work with people now, my focus is going to be on speaking and
Okay.
having conversations like this. I am a licensed massage therapist,
Okay.
but I'm not taking any new clients. And I will continue to do that work for a while, but I'm mostly now going on panels and speaking at events to just to have these conversations. To me, this is what is important, is to have these conversations with you, Tammy, and for people to hear that there is a way to heal and that they can have these conversations without shame, without blame, without guilt, because my book is a call to action that I want to have these conversations, and I want people to understand that even if they say, oh, but you know I had a wonderful childhood and I didn't have a dysfunctional family, and ACEs, this doesn't affect me. Why should I care about ACEs? And I say, because it does affect you. The impact of trauma is a public health issue affecting our communities in many ways. If 61% of adults have at least one ACE, that could be your spouse, your best friend, your coworker, your boss, your neighbor. And childhood trauma costs society billions every year in healthcare, lost productivity, addiction, mental illness, and incarceration. And as we talked about before, that it shapes how we parent, how we love, how we live. And my pretty baby is not just my story, it's everyone's.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So I appreciate that. So go out and grab her book, grab Wendy's book, My
My
Pretty Baby.
pretty baby.
I'll put the links in the show notes. And until then, thank you because I'd love to follow you on Instagram and just hear your message because you're right. It is a message that so many people need to hear. And if you can just make one person aware, just one at a time, just become aware that it wasn't their fault, that there's people out there that are going through exactly what they're going through, and that you deserve to heal. You
Yes,
deserve to have the best life possible. That's why we were put on this planet to be abundant and to thrive and to be joyous and not to be bogged down with chains of the past, really.
right. And I tell my story so that others will feel less alone in theirs. So I really hope, if you're listening out there and you're not sure where to begin, please pick up My Pretty Baby wherever you buy books. And you're welcome to reach out to me through my website or on social media. And thank you, Tammy, for giving My Pretty Baby a voice and I just hope that my book reaches whoever most needs to hear these words and this wisdom.
Well, I think they will. And I feel like that's why we do these podcasts, is because whoever needs to hear it is going to hear it. They're going to come across it somehow, some way. And that's why we continue to do what we do. But thank you so much for coming on. And I very much appreciate you. And for everybody else out there listening, you all have a very blessed day, blessed week. We will see you back. And remember, you are enough just the way you are right now, right here. But if you want more, it's out there for the taking. So go and get it. You so deserve it. See you next week.